A second possible answer is that Mauss was still running on tracks laid down by Durkheim's division of labour. There's a certain form of social integration that is normal to society at a given level of social development, and from which departures are abnormal or pathological. So, Sir Fred Goodwin represents a pathological departure from the normal form of the modern exchange system, rather than being its quintessence, as Marx might have supposed, just as Bolshevism represents a pathological development of the normal form of socialism. There's no need, in other words, on that line of reasoning, to suppose that society is riven by deep social conflicts, irreconcilable social conflicts. Somehow it's going to restore the balance and return to its normal form. And what all this implies, it seems to me, is a rather charitable view of human nature. One in which King Arthur's knights must eventually see sense and agree to bury the hatchet. One in which noble expenditure must eventually win out over Homo economicus. And one in which a genteel form of non-Bolshevik socialism must eventually persuade the majority. We're still waiting. In any event, Mauss consistently follows Durkheim's rejection of revolutionary class struggle as a means of achieving socialism, and he seems uninterested in the role that class might play in holding socialism at bay or in promoting it. And the occasional references that he makes to the role of the proletariat are either dismissive or to say, well, they just got a part in the whole struggle which is undertaken for society as a whole, which sounds actually very like Karl Polanyi at that point. But on the whole, there's a general downplaying of class. Having assessed Bolshevism negatively, Mauss turns briefly to Britain, which he says had far more possibilities for the development of socialism than poor agricultural Russia, on account of its wealth and on account of its tradition of municipal and administrative socialism. But he makes no mention at all of organised labour or of its muscle. And arguably it was the flexing of that muscle that eventually produced major concessions for the working class as a whole and led to the improvement of living standards, which is going to be crucial to what I'll end with. So, what I want to argue is that in the Indian case, this flexing of the political muscle of the working class could not take place for structural reasons, and it's Mauss's inability to ask questions about class and divisions within classes that enables me to get a purchase on that kind of dynamic. Now, it's true that he does very briefly mention intermediary organizations as a prerequisite for creating socialism. And what initially intrigued him about the Russian Revolution was the apparent similarity between the Soviets and Durkheim's professional organizations. And he says that only the professional group seemed to Durkheim to be close enough for the individual, close enough to the individual for individual and group to have the same interests, but on the other hand, distant enough for the group to control the individual. And what he says is further crucial is that intermediary organizations are important in curbing the power of the state. And the Bolsheviks' refusal to build them up was one reason why.
You just had a quarter of an hour if you want more, you have no.
Can I take
Yes,
4
yes.
minutes?
Yes,
5
yes,
minutes?
yes.
So the Bolsheviks' refusal to build up intermediate organizations was one of the reasons that the revolution failed. So this sounds very like a kind of theory of civil society. But remember Gramsci's diagnosis. Civil society institutions like trades unions, which are presumably a species of professional or intermediary organization, Gramsci says, might be part of the problem, not the solution. That is, they often entrench the hegemony of the political class and secure the consent of the subalterns. And that's what I would argue most Indian unions have done. And it seems to me impossible to understand the obstacles to the realization of Nehru's socialism without taking account of the way in which the state has created divisions within the working class with separate interests, those interests being represented by union politics that are basically one fragment of the working class competing against another. But that's the kind of development on which Mauss's discussion of socialism offers us no handle. So I don't have time at all to elaborate this, but let me just try and pin that difficulty down by saying very bold assertions about my own ethnography. There are tens of thousands of workers employed in a public sector steel plant who are aristocrats of labour, who enjoy pay, perks and conditions that make them the envy of every other working class family. Their children go to good quality company schools, their families are treated in a decent hospital. In terms of material conditions, in terms of their lifestyle, their opportunities for mobility, they are so far removed from the mass of unorganized sector workers that it is nonsense to regard them as members of the same class with common interests. So what we have here are miners and steel workers, all employed by the plant, people who are conventionally seen as the vanguard of the proletariat, who are now, by every definition, in the middle class. Now, in countries like Britain, miners and steel workers really were a vanguard of the middle class and used their political clout to wrest concessions for the working class as a whole. But in India, this aristocracy of public sector labour has never had to fight for relatively decent schools or hospitals for itself, and never therefore had to fight for those in the name of the working class as a whole. They were just handed them on a plate. So the result is that basic rights of citizenship do not exist in any meaningful form for the vast majority, because those who might have had some leverage had no incentive to do the fighting. So the question is, how did King Arthur really get his knights round that table? And that was the question that Marcel Mauss evaded, because I don't see these Indian lords of labour ever agreeing to sit down and be reasonable. And let me just finally put it another way, and in perhaps a more general way, that Mauss has exercised a very profound influence on the sociology of India, very largely through Louis Dumont. And Dumont has been so influential, and hence Mauss, that all the terms of the debate have been dictated by him. And what are the terms of the debate been about? They have been about a sociology of values. And that's why Dumont seemed so important to my earlier work. But as André Bataille long ago protested, we need a sociology of interests to complement that sociology of values. And here, Mauss is not a good model. And a fortiori, if we think that the central questions of sociology are the interactions between ideas and interests, he's not much help either. So, despite the brilliance of his insights, my pitch is that his canonization should be delayed.
What's the